We have two speakers tonight. At the moment, Greg Barnes was going to be our first speaker, but he's been held up. So in a minute, we'll start with Willei Coe. But I just want to say a few little things about some of the stuff that's been going on. In the last Zoom, we heard a lot about the militarised police and army that invaded southwestern Sydney, causing all sorts of havoc and distress. For many, it probably felt like the first time that this has happened, but every land on this continent has been invaded. And it's not the first time in recent years either. Our open letter reminds us that the 14-year emergency of the Northern Territory has been ongoing for 14 years. Communities were invaded, re-invaded, and that is still going. Hundreds of millions of dollars were spent on police centres. For example, Little Ramingining had 25 million spent. It's a direct line from those police stations to a growing prison population in the Northern Territory. And it's a direct line to the $7 million police station at Yuendamu, where in late 2019, young Kumanjayi Walker was shot by a policeman. In the background of that are all the corporations lining up to grab the lands of the Northern Territory. Bipartisan support for the 51% of the territory that's up for fracking, open for fracking on Aboriginal lands. That's the background to some of the background to what's going on right around the country. Though not quite always as dramatic as the Northern Territory intervention, First Peoples are increasingly making up larger and larger percentages of the larger and larger prison populations. So with that in mind, Willei Coe, most of you is our next speaker. Most of you will have got our pre-publicity. His father was Billy Craigie, one of the four founders of the Tent Embassy. His mother, Adele Graham, is an important Wiradjuri leader, a mired and powerful matriarch of her community. So Willei has grown up living and breathing Aboriginal struggle. He's educated at a very young age about all of the stuff that's going on, and we're really lucky to have him to speak with us tonight. So I'd like to welcome Willei.
Hey, Jan. Thanks, Lindy. My name's Willei Coe, or a Wiradjuri man. A little bit of background about myself. I lived in Sydney. I grew up in Redfern and Waterloo pretty much all my teen life. And for the last 15 or so years, I've lived in Cowra. That's where me mother's from, Ramby Mission. That's just pretty much a brief background about myself. I've been in and around First Nation struggle pretty much all my life, and I've seen firsthand what our people go through pretty much every day. And it's as people that are tuning in probably already know about this. for talking about this situation with COVID in jails and stuff. I think that the issue is, one of the main issues is that people that are locked up at the moment, they're pretty much being locked up 23 hours a day. This is what I'm hearing. I'm not haven't been in jail or anything like that recently, but yeah, people are struggling with their mental health. You know, that they can't get onto people from the outside world just to have a chat about things. Pretty much the only people that they're pretty much talking to are the screws, and the social workers. And the social workers, what I'm hearing is they don't even see them every day. They're like seeing people once every 2 or 3 days. So, you know, in saying that, these people that are locked up in there, they're like, their mental health could be struggling. You know, seeing 4 walls for 2 or 3 days and then finally get to see a social worker. That's like, you know, like it's inhumane. Like being locked up 23 hours out of the day, and that's in some circumstances it's 24 hours out of that's all day, and you know they can't speak to anybody for 2 or 3 days. There's also stories of you know, young 18 and 19-year-old boys pretty much getting locked up and getting COVID, and they're not being able to speak with their parents or their mother or father for, you know, 2 or 3 weeks. And then after the 2 or 3 weeks that they've come out and said, oh yeah, no, well, they've had COVID, so, you know, like we couldn't get anybody in to talk to them or let them ring you up to make sure they're all right. Like these are the type of struggles that, you know, all people in jail are going through. But I feel that First Nations people would really be struggling because, you know, like we're already at a disadvantage anyways in life. So, you know, like not being able to talk to your mother or your sister or someone that can help you while you're struggling in these times is really going to be a struggle for your mental health. So yeah, I just think that these things need to be changed. There needs to be a different type of way things should be done in there. Like, you know, like yeah, like I said, these young fellas, their mental health is just struggling. Like, you know, I haven't heard of anybody actually killing themselves, but I'm pretty sure that there's would have been some type of stuff like that they're going through, you know. Yeah, it's like my opinion is, I just think that it's inhumane. Like you can't treat people like that over a virus that, you know, like I said, it's my opinion. I just don't think a young, healthy, or a healthier type of person should be locked in a cage for 23 to 4 hours a day. Sorry about that. My light just went off. Just have to fix that up. Yeah, sorry about that. But yeah, that's some of the struggles that these people that are going through in jail at the moment. And like Lindy said, I'm not just an advocate for you know, in people that Indigenous people. I'm an advocate for Indigenous people that are in jail as well. So yeah, I really think that there should be some kind of changes that are going on in there. With maybe, you know, like trying to get the vaccines in as soon as possible. I'm hearing, what I've been told is that there's at least 300 inmates that that have got COVID at the moment. I'm not exactly sure how many numbers, but that's what I've been told. And if there's, there's at least a percentage of that, a lot of percentage of that is Indigenous people. So I feel that, most of these people could be Indigenous or First Nations people that have got it. Also, letting people out that have got it. There should have been more help around that. There should be more communication around that. Like a Walgett, I've been told that one of the people that got let out of jail then, they pretty much just let them go straight to Walgett. Walgett is a small community, and it's a good percentage there is First Nations people. So going out there to Walgett, it's going to run rampant out there. So, and that's just one community. Here in Cowra, it's pretty much running rampant now in my community as well. So yeah, I just feel that there's better ways. There should be better ways for this type of stuff to be done. There should. Yeah, it's just. Yeah, it's too much at the moment. Is there anything else?
I've got a question for you, Willei, from Robert. Is there any word of social workers who are not happy with the COVID isolation in prisons?
Like I said, I myself haven't heard anything about any social workers that are not happy about it, but I dare say that there would be. I know some people that are in there now for being incarcerated for the first time, and these people have been locked up without any. They can't speak to anybody. They haven't been able to, and they haven't been able to ring anybody. Their parents haven't been able to get in contact with them, and the only person that they've been in contact with was the social worker. What I was speaking, the social worker that I spoke to, he didn't really talk about whether he's happy or not, because I didn't really ask, but so yeah.
Robert, anyone who has some questions, either just on prisons or the wider issue of what's happening with COVID, how people are feeling about it in Aboriginal communities, First Nations communities, please put forward your questions. He's got a second question. What can we it's again from Robert, what can we on the outside do to help people inside facing COVID and the other struggles you spoke about? What can be done to support people?
I don't know, maybe like getting these type of things out there. I feel that, from my personal opinion, I think that so going to social media, all these type of platforms and getting this information out there as much as possible would probably be, from what I think would be the best way to, let the wider community know what's going on, because a lot of people are blind to this stuff. They don't really, a lot of people don't really care what happens in jail. They see them as bad people, so they're in jail for a reason, so that's why we don't really care, sort of thing. And it's sad to say, because not everybody that's in jail is a bad person.
Oh, that's for sure. I've got a question from Derek. What quarantine and vaccination provisions do you know have been undertaken the First Nations prisoners?
what I've been told is that now a lot of them have got their second vaccines, but they could have got them done a long time ago, a lot earlier than what they are now. So yeah, that's what I've been told, that a lot of them have got it done now, but then there's still a lot of people that don't want to get the vaccine and all that type of stuff as well. But like I said, the option should have been there a long time before it was actually rolled out into prisons.
One of the things that you raised was them not being able to call. What do you think the reason that they weren't even allowed to contact their families? What do you think the reason for that? Is it just typical of the prisons, or
yeah, well, like with that, it is typical of the prisons. Like you know, yeah, like I said, it is typical of the prisons, because when you'll get in there and you'll try and have a conversation, or you try and speak to somebody about getting a call out to your parents or your loved ones or whatever it may be, but that's a struggle itself. But then with all these COVID restrictions, it's basically you can't even call anybody. What I've been told is that like I know some people that are in there at the moment, and they've been in there and haven't been able to contact anybody in their family for like 3 weeks. They're pretty much passing messages on from the social workers. So yeah, like I said, I'm not in jail at the moment, but I dare say it would be a struggle.
Yeah. And just a question, just before the lockdown in Sydney, there was a big Black Lives Matters protest at Parklea Prison. What would you like to say about the movement and the fact perhaps that it took place in a prison?
It just shows the struggle that prisoners are going through. Like it's not just out here. Like, and if you get locked up, it'd be worse. Especially, well, what I've seen is that it was only all young fellas that were doing it. So, like even young fellas going out doing a Black Lives Matter protest. That's really, really strong, because they're seeing out here what's going on. But like I said, it gets worse when you're in jail, because you're pretty much getting, all of your rights taken away from you. Parklea, and I think Parklea Jail is a privately owned jail. I think, I'm not too sure, but
yes.
If you're a privately owned jail, then they can pretty much do what they want to do. You pretty much, you've already lost 80% of your rights. In a privately owned jail, you lost another 10 to 15% of it. So yeah, so they can pretty much do what they want to do to you.
I've got a question from Linda, someone Willei Coe. Should the government release prisoners as an emergency response to the growing rate of transmission in jails?
Short answer to that is yes.
I know that's one of the things that Greg Barnes was stating, and I'm just wondering if anyone can tell me, if Pat can tell me if Greg is here yet, just so we know how our timing's going. So it was a great question from Linda. Maybe you've got some more, Linda. Is Greg here yet? Or Greg, are you here yet? Okay. Some of the stuff that's been on the edges of the media that I've seen, and on the edges of social media, are the places where First Peoples haven't got enough food. Out west, where they don't have enough to feed them, and that the police are at the doors of their communities, but not providing food. Have you got any more information about what's been going on in those circumstances?
Well, it comes down to police in the communities. Like First Nations people don't trust the police. That's one. So, you know what I mean? Like, they're not going to, a police officer comes to their door and says they're going to do this and they're going to do that. They're going to be asking questions straight away, saying, well, what are you coming here for, you know? Like, don't just turn up out of the blue and say, oh, you know, we're going to do this and we're going to do that for you, because, you know, First Nations people are going to say, go away, I don't want to talk to you.
Yeah.
That's just a defense mechanism that, you know, us First Nations people have. You know, and that's just from growing up seeing police do what they do to our people.
Yeah. I've got a question that has some, I'll just try and scroll it without losing it. And I know a name here, Brett Collins, who's been a tremendous advocate for prisoners through Justice Action. It's fantastic to see you here, Brett. Brett's statement, and if we don't get Greg here soon, I'm not sure what's happening, we might ask Brett to make a few comments, but he's got, can you imagine what it would feel like to be left in a cell waiting to be infected, no exercise, no job, visits and access to services in the cell? Do you think prisoners and their families would feel angry and desperate?
100% they would. 110% they would. People, like I said, like what I've been told is that's happening now, and you know, people can't speak to their loved ones, so you know they're really struggling, and yeah, with that, 100% they would. Being locked down for, like I said before, 23 hours a day, and when you get let out, this is what I've been told, you get let out for an hour, and that's you know, that's not even in all cases. Some cases they're not even letting them out. So in cases where people are being like angry and stuff like that, and being you know, violent, they're not letting them out. So there's some places where some people ain't getting let out for 3 or 4 days.
I've just received an unfortunate message from Greg that it's an emergency and he can't get here, and sends his apologies. I know we have, I've got another question from before, but I'll suggest that Brett or Linda June Coe, would either of you be prepared to say something based on the knowledge that you guys have? Brett or Linda June, just message, and if you are, I'll ask this question and see how we go. You're doing really well, Willei. I think this is your first time speaking on a Zoom, and yeah, it's great. So I've got a question. Anti-vaxxers, wait a minute. I'll just try and drag it down a little bit.
Lindy,
wait a minute. No. Oh, Brett.
I'd be quite happy to give you a little update on what we understand the situation is. We've been, as probably people, maybe some people are aware, that have launched a Supreme Court action on behalf of families. And I'm really pleased, for example, Adele is one of the families representatives over here at the moment. We've had hundreds of family members approach us and saying, what can Justice Action do about the situation? And so there's no way we can sit back and do nothing. It just can't happen. We got like we're talking about 13,000 people sitting at the moment in their cells, and it's just as Willei has described, the situation is just absolutely impossible, untenable. Like Greg Barnes, for example, is one of the people who's talked about how it's a breach of the United Nations Convention Against Torture to leave people in the cell without access to any fresh air, access to health, and then waiting to be infected. People who have been observing the area of prisons know that the rate of infection inside the US prisons is 6 times the rate of that out in the general community. So, we're just waiting for, well, in fact, already have seen in Parklea, the rate there of infection is 10 times that of the general community. So and the other thing about this is the health of people in prisons is really poor, it's really low. People are left in their cells, they start to get more and more depressed as they sit in there as well, no access to family members. So all that stuff has been just a really appalling situation. And then of course the health services inside the prison, everyone agrees, are really poor. So it means you don't have your own doctor, you don't have people you trust, and a First Nations a person does not have access to the Aboriginal medical service, for example. It doesn't happen. So like we were in front of a parliamentary inquiry 2 weeks ago, and we had those questions were asked quite directly from Justice Health. Why haven't you got Aboriginal medical services in there? Why haven't you got people who are trusted to deliver services? And wouldn't you expect resistance to vaccination as well? But why have you got vaccination rates of only 22%? And they said, well, they weren't even concerned. They were treating prisoners as though they were just sort of and not important. But then they got their comeuppance on it as well, because as soon as they started to release people out of Parklea, they had people going down into places like Bateman's Bay, and then whole communities were infected as a result of that. So you have people moving through the prison system all the time, you're going in and out, and then infecting the general community. And that stage they started to stand up and went, whoa, it's not as easy as they thought it was. They couldn't just leave prisoners in there just to be infected and forget them. So there are some significant issues here, but the politics of it is that, as Willei was saying, if you can leave prisoners in behind their cell doors and actually act as though it's not important, and you can't hear the screams and things, and you can't hear the anger, then you might just hope that the average citizen is going to forget them entirely. So what we decided, after a lot of pressure from families and people like Adele, for example, who I'm hoping that she might say something shortly, a family member, they said to us, let's run something, let's do something. And so we said, yeah, let's do it. So we've got a Supreme Court action coming up next Wednesday, where we're demanding that they use the power they have to release people. So the commission has been given the power to release people. And so just particularly last year, in March, they changed the law, which allows them to release people, but they've done nothing. So low vaccination rates, we said they must vaccinate all these prison officers and screws have got to be vaccinated. How dare they not be? The same as aged care. And they have to give people access to vaccinations, have proper health services, people who, doctors who are trusted, instead of having, having people who don't give a stuff about you, and then having access to locking people in cells. And they'll leave people in cells for we've heard all but 10 minutes a day, a whole day without 10 minutes out. And some people have been 17 days in a cell with not having left the cell at all. Appalling situation. So anyway, we've got a case coming up, and on Wednesday, and we intend to go and thrash around a bit, and we've got a few lawyers who'll give us a hand as well. Otherwise, we're going in regardless.
And I've got a question from Adele, who says, I'm in contact with a lot of prisoners' families from Parklea CC who have been COVID positive and are almost immediately being given the COVID vaccine after the negative result against health advice. Is this happening at other prisons?
Well, look, maybe I can answer that a little bit. I mean, some of these things are very variable. Parklea Prison is a private prison, and they have really poor health services. They've just been acting as though people don't matter. So we are starting to get a bit of a response there from the governor. He's talking with us. We had a conversation last week, and we're getting a bit of a response now. But it's only from pressure people like Adele who are actually pushing, as families pushing for a response that anything is occurring, and people like you guys. I mean, just having your support and your interest in the area, it makes a big difference. It really does.
Pat, Adele, would you be interested in speaking? Could you just
Yeah,
message us?
that's fine. I
Okay,
guess,
great.
how much do you want to know?
No, well, just what, could you just give a quick, I don't know you, so please introduce yourself.
Okay.
Apologies.
No, that's fine. So my name's Adele. I am a partner of a inmate currently in custody at Parklea. Very graciously and thankfully, he planned his misgivings, I said, in a very timely manner, because he's was sentenced and classified to minimum before the outbreak occurred. At Parklea Correctional Centre, their minimum facility is very separate, in a separate building. So he is thankfully, to date, touch wood, has been safe from any COVID risk. However, you know, I'm actively involved in social media, on support groups, and I noticed that I actually first became aware of the outbreak at Parklea Correctional Centre on the 24th of August. I know that negates the media response Parklea gave to the media, saying it was the 27th, the 28th, in some articles even the 30th. We have since debunked that, because whilst Parklea said that to the media, they did communicate honestly to the inmates and put communications under their door, written communications, which verified the outbreak did start earlier. Things that I'm definitely concerned about is long isolation periods. There were men that were COVID positive who were in the COVID wings for 30 plus days, with zero contact with family during that time. We also know that the cells that they're being kept in haven't actually been cleared from the New South Wales Commissioner, to the best of our knowledge, to hold 2 cellmates in each cell. They've only been cleared as a 1 out. They are being used as 2 outs. They're not using the bunks. They're putting mattresses on the floor. We've had inmates that have been released who have said they only received observation once per day by nursing staff, and that they witnessed nursing staff not cleaning down equipment in between testing inmates with this observation equipment. We've had reports of guards wearing the same PPE all day without changing it, which again increases risk of transmission. We've had reports of inmates that have been so affected by their time in isolation that they were having auditory and visual hallucinations. We have had reports of a possible suicide, although we have been unable to prove that. Parklea is denying it. I have had one inmate inside and one inmate released, both say that they saw a body being wheeled out at one stage in the past 2 weeks. We've had reports of rats in the COVID wings, and that they're not being cleaned between inmates being brought in and out. We've had reports of inmates who have finally become COVID negative, only to be placed in a cell with an inmate that has now tested COVID positive, which means they go into isolation again. We have had reports of inmates being threatened and gagged. We have had multiple reports of calls being disconnected when inmates are discussing their conditions or their health or well-being. More alarmingly is what I mentioned just now, prisoners who are being encouraged to have the vaccine straight away after testing COVID negative. We know that best practice is a minimum 8-week gap, up to 6 months, depending on the person's individual health. There's been no AVLs in maximum for almost 2 months now. They've started to dribble through slowly, but there was definitely a 6-week period where no one was having any even video contact. We've had inmates that have missed out on appeal windows, that have missed out on legal representation. I've had reports that the ECG machine in the health clinic at minimum is non-operational. That's a piece of life-saving equipment. It's not working. I haven't had any response on that. A lot of the information that I have put forward seeking response has been ignored and or taken an excessive amount of time to get a response. We had an inmate threaten suicide to his partner over the phone yesterday, and it's taken about 30 hours for her to get a call back from a correctionals officer, even though in our request, the response that we requested was that she be put in contact with her partner. She recently just got a call off the correctional officer there saying, your partner's promised he's not going to kill himself. So that's about the status of the experience day to day. We've also had multiple reports from families who didn't even know that an inmate was COVID positive and or had been told the whole time that the inmate is fine, they've hardly got any symptoms, only to find out that that inmate was hospitalized. The best treatment that we've known of the inmates have been receiving in there to treat their COVID symptoms to date are 2 Panadol osteo tablets and a 2 milligram melatonin once per day. And they're not getting that straight away. It's sometimes not until day 5. We've also had reports where inmates have said they've hit the distress intercom in the middle of the night for an inmate who they believe has needed medical assistance, and that the intercom has been turned off and there's been no response.
Wow. That's a litany, a horrific litany. One of the things I know that Greg Barnes and many other people, including Justice Action, were calling for at the beginning of this epidemic pandemic, was that all prisoners who were non-serious, unless they were the most violent or most serious, committed for the most violent, charged with the most violent crimes, that prisoners should be released. What do you or Brett or Willei, I'll put it to any one of you three that want to speak to it, and is it still possible, given the numbers of people with COVID within the prison, what should be done to help them get out of prison now or as soon as possible for their own safety, for the safety of society?
Well, I will say one of the first things that I raised with Parklea in regards to prisoners being discharged was that they weren't affording any sort of accommodation options, not only taking into account have you got somewhere to go, but also taking into account if they're positive. If you have a family home to go to, is that a safe place for you to isolate? My mum actually works for New South Wales Health, and she currently manages a quarantine hotel. So I'm very well informed about the services that are available there, and was able to pass that on to Parklea about SHA and CHA facilities. I also had a lengthy conversation with Health Direct New South Wales, their COVID response hotline, who informed me that it was St Vincent's Health's role to arrange that for inmates. So I did convey that through, and I do believe that there may have been some action now as a result of that, but in the beginning there was none. Families were being given no information. They were asking, well, what are we supposed to do? And basically it was being put on them like, well, we're going to release them. If they can't go home, that's your problem to try and sort out. So as you can imagine, if you're coming to pick up your partner or your son or your brother and they're COVID positive, you're already putting yourself at risk, irrespective, just by transporting them. And then putting your family at risk and your community at risk. So I did go and follow that up and forward that information on. I think there has been some action plans put into place regarding rapid testing before release, and finding out if the home is safe or whether they need to arrange alternative accommodation. I do know that it is an issue if an inmate has no accommodation to go to, because my understanding is linked to home and emergency housing will not provide accommodation to someone that is COVID positive. So that needs to be taken into account as well, in regards to making arrangements for hotel quarantine for that 2-week period.
Can I just respond to the question that was posed about releases? There was law brought in March last year that would allow people to be released if they were in the last 12 months of their sentence, as long as they weren't charged with domestic violence offences or sex offences or some particular category. So in the last 12 months of their sentence, they could be then granted parole by the commissioner. It was actually COVID emergency legislation brought in particularly for this purpose, and it was passed with both ALP and Lib support. So that was actually there, and it's only a question of the commissioner actually doing it. But at the moment, unfortunately, the ALP has said that they don't really support the release of those prisoners, which I think is a real shame. Actually, it really is a shame. Now, the point that Adele makes is really obviously valid too. Anyone at the moment who's released from Parklea is required to spend 14 days in quarantine. Now, where are they going to quarantine? Why would you, after being locked in a cell, and we're here for days and many days, weeks actually now, without access to any family, how possibly could you walk out, come out of the prison, and then not see your family? Come on, that's just ridiculous. So there are a whole lot of services have to be put in place, and also people have to have access to services, and also how possibly can you have the whole population of Parklea Prison, which is 1,000 prisoners? How can you possibly have those people having to quarantine upon release? They're only there for a month and a half on average. So you've got all these hundreds and hundreds of people who are coming out, and you have an impossible situation where they cannot quarantine. They put their family at risk. And of course, you have thousands of other prisoners who could be released, who are not being, but who should have access to services. But I can make one more point. I think it's really important. You've got people like Adele, and she's a family member, and you can hear the emotion behind her. She's looking after her papa, and now that's the strength really of the prisoner movement. And so when it comes to people like Adele, we can count on them, and Willei, of course. Willei, he's had the prison experience, and he comes in with the energy that says that we're going to look after our family, our people out there. That's the support that we can call on. And at any one time, we've got 13,000 prisoners in there. For every prisoner, you've got normally 3 people who are really closely connected to them. That's 50,000 people here in New South Wales. Now that's an army, and that's an army of intensity, of anger, of preparedness to go to the streets if necessary and do things. They really want to do things. So people like Adele, they're the inspiration, and they're all out there. We just have to give them access to have a chance to speak.
We've got a couple of questions. This is for Willei, Brett, or Adele. And pretty obvious, one of the Justice Action is one of those organisations. It says, what organisations are there for prisoner rights? It's interesting, quite frightening, that I've never heard of such organisations.
Well, just to respond, of course, people like ourselves don't get funded, but we don't. And there are funded organisations out there that actually don't dare stand up. So you've got an organisation called the Community Restorative Centre. They pick up $7 million. They employ 60 odd people, right, in different places around the state. They don't raise their voice at all because they're being funded. And we're a voluntary organisation, and we're just like Adele and like Willei. We don't get funded, but we're there to fight. And so, just the fact that we haven't got big offices and things like that, all that says really is that, no one can pull our chain. At least we can say what's honest and what's direct, and we must stand by our community, no question about that.
Now, just got a comment by Rachel. There was a statement signed by over 170 legal advocates and organisations demanding the release of prisoners, and there's a Facebook link up there as well. Down to Peter. Oops, I've lost it. It's my computer scrolls sometimes, I'm sorry, and it scrolled way back up to the beginning. Is it possible for isolated inmates to be given access to mobile phones and to have even that limited contact with family?
We've been told a little bit of different feedback. One is mobile phones are banned in prisons, so that kind of cuts that out, and that's for staff as well. The other, for some prisons, they have claimed that the reception in the cells is not adequate for if they have a cordless phone. Wiley, did you have something to say?
No.
Oh, okay. So in short, there has been, I know that the governor of Parklea, Paul Baker, said that they were looking at setting up some sort of communication that they can wheel into the cells where prisoners are COVID positive. Given that they're not cleaning equipment now, I do have some concerns about how that will work, and whether that will, whilst assisting in communication, also assist in transmission of the virus. But we have not seen anything take place to date.
How hard would it be for whoever it be to let them get out just to call for half an hour or 10 minutes a day? Like, you know what I mean? It's not as if it's that hard. Like, all they got to do is just come out, let them do the call, and then after that, wipe off everything and let them go back into their cell. Like, that's how, like, seriously, that is not hard to do.
Well, maybe I can respond to that actually, Willei, because Paul Baker, the governor of Parklea, said that as of last weekend, he said that what they're doing is taking the handpieces into prisoners at the moment who are COVID positive. And I make the point, I agree with what Adele says, that there are also risks as well. But obviously that's the sort of stuff they should pick up by now, for heaven's sake. So, but one thing we have got as one of the points for the Supreme Court action is there's 6 points in the action itself. The sixth point, and one which we should be able to achieve, and one we're negotiating carefully with Parklea Governor now on, is access to computer tablets in the cells, because they have that in other jails, and it would make all the difference. People, at least if they are being locked in their cells, they have at least access to to use them as a phone. And they have like these are a server base, so you have a dumb tablet, which is then connected by wireless directly to a server, which the jail actually controls. And then on that, they have access also to services. They can put a keyboard on there as well, and they can access a whole lot of stuff there, including access to education, access to rehab services, all those sort of things. And those things are already happening in other jails, including places like Kempsey. They've actually been up there now, and even Serco, the Serco new run jail up there at Clarence, has tablets at least in their cells, although we're told not a great deal of information is actually available at the moment in the tablets. But they're things that can come out of this situation, the positive situation. So we've included that as our sixth point in our claim for relief before the Supreme Court on Wednesday. So let's see what happens there.
I've got a question. I've got a really quick one for Brett, and I'd just like a really quick answer to it. Does Justice Action have GoFundMe page or something similar for its High Court challenge?
Yes, we do. Oh, good on you. Good on you for raising the issue. We've already received $3,000, would you believe, on the GoFundMe pages.
And we'll publicise it on Spirit of Eureka's one. Here's a very deep one from Linda June. Following on from the Black Lives Movement's protests last year calling for the abolition of police powers and a shift to community-based solutions, how do we as First Nations and allies bring about change when our carceral culture is fundamental to dispossession?
Well, big question. I mean, the first thing you do is, and I think it's really important to do, is to establish who is actually inside the jails at the moment. Because you find every time someone actually sees who's in jail, you think, hang on, why have they got these people in there? You got old men there. You got people 70, 80 years old who's sitting in a cell, for heaven's sake. You've got young kids running through the place. You have people who just, it's outrageous they're locked in a cell. So I think the first thing you need to do is to break down all the stereotypes of all these dangerous, mad people who are sitting in there. If you have a few faces in there showing who they are, suddenly you realise that this is an outrage. They're spending $100,000 on every person in the cell, and they're spending $500,000 building each cell for every person. So how dare they spend that money out there when they can spend the money on public housing, proper services in the place, and make it much safer community? So I think that's the story. The story is getting faces and getting people's stories out there, so people can start to identify with the ones who are in the cells.
I think more rehabs and less jails.
Hey.
Absolutely.
I think there's too many jails in Australia. Half of them need to be shut down.
I don't think you get any argument with you there, Willei. We've only got there's one more question here, and it's, if you were running the place properly and the prisoners are already being confined, why isn't it possible to quarantine for the time before release in a clean cell?
I can say for Parklea that I have heard they are planning on doing this for prisoners that they know may be due for release in the upcoming weeks. So I have heard from partners of inmates that have informed them that they will likely be going into a quarantine period pre-release. And I do think that it is a good idea in regards to reducing transmission. But after seeing the effects, not just from the virus, we need to understand the effects of ongoing isolation and what it does for a person's physical, mental, emotional, and social health. I mean, it causes sensory deprivation. I've spoken with inmates who are trying to recollect what happened and they can't remember what day it was. And I know just from my own experience with lockdown in the outside world, that happens to some of us as well. So I can only imagine being in much more confined quarters with no communication, no stimuli, and particularly if you're unwell on top of that, how it would affect you over time.
Now, I don't see... Sorry?
It's inhumane. They're pretty much treating people like animals.
Would anyone be able, apart from ending invasion and dispossession, which is a pretty obvious one for First Peoples, has anyone got anything that they'd like to say that is a possible way forward, apart from making sure people are able to get out of jail as soon as possible and safely, that we support the challenge and the court challenge, but has anyone got any other things that are positives that people can fight for? I think it was part of the core of Linda June's question.
Can I say something? It's Stephen here. Hi.
I think, Stephen, I think we might keep it for the
really short.
Yeah, the people that are already in there, rather than all of us. Thanks, Stephen, for your offer.
It's on your mobile.
Oh, there's a question, is there?
Yeah, I don't know how to do it from my mobile.
Oh, sorry, I haven't seen that, and I better try and find it because we're going to have to stop here. I knew my phone was going. Okay, I've written to, can we make the point that the issues for the people, for example, in Villa Ward are similar? I've written to Dr. Norman Swan to bring this to the fore. Captive populations are at high risk. Thanks for that comment, Stephen. And it says no reply.
Can I just add something, Lindy? Yeah. I'm just wondering why we can't. Okay, so the New South Wales Health has been pulling nurses from, private and everywhere and deploying them to places to work like your COVID hotels. We need extra staff in COVID wards because we do realise that you know, a sick COVID patient takes more care. So if we can do that out here, why the hell can't we, the jails or the prisons, have more nurses brought in there to help out with the care? You can also help out with, they've got extra, like, they're being treated so, like I've been blown away by what she's been saying with how the treatment is there. It's like, it's really made me really angry and really upset. But so I don't see why, if we can put extra nurses into all these other places to look after our COVID patients, why can't we have extra nurses being put into the prisons to do it?
I don't think it's a question of why we certainly can, like it's doable, but we're talking about, particularly in regards to Parklea, a privately run prison who has a very, very toxic culture. Even amongst, like, I'm appalled at what I hear about the healthcare staff compared to the outside. I'm just appalled. I think it would be very confronting for nursing staff in the hospital systems in a care setting. It would create conflict. There would be potential for whistleblowing. Parklea don't want you to know. They do not want you to know the reality of what goes on inside there. That's the answer.
I could add to a tiny bit to that with deaths in custody. Certainly in one of the coroner's inquiries for David Dungay Jr., there was an issue with health staff, and it wasn't a private prison, health staff being complicit, allegations that they were complicit. And I think it's not just Parklea. So, look, I'm afraid we've had, I do think that everybody ought to be raising this sort of stuff with their union, and I think it's something that you could ask Heidi for your officers of the union to have a look at this. This is going to go up in the next day or so on YouTube, for them to have a look at it, talk to them about it and say, you need to know, we need to get this story out there. I think it's been an incredibly powerful forum for all of us. I thank Willei first for coming forward, Brett and Adele for making such a terrific contribution also without even being invited to do so. So fantastic.